I did it again, but this time I caught myself more quickly. Unmuted. Good morning. Welcome to the Coffee Chat. Today we're going to be talking about when your child, your adult child, is not talking to you. But this is part two. So I will be back in just a moment and we will get this thing started. All right, we're back. Welcome to the Coffee Chat. I'm glad you are here. Today is when your adult child will not talk to you, part two, right? And why are we doing part two is because we got some questions. So if you're watching this for the first time, my name is Jonathan. I am a family therapist and also an addictions counselor. And I run the Facebook group of parents of adult children, failure to launch. And I also have the YouTube channel, which I put these all archived on there as well, these talks. But this is a newer thing we're doing. This is week two, the first full week of just a morning to chat, to connect about anything having to do with parenting adult children, struggling adult children, failure to launch, addiction issues, all of that. So I'm glad you are watching this. And this is live, unless you're watching on replay. But if you are watching it live, then feel free to ask a question. I know we're still kind of building up, and we do this in the morning, so not many people can watch it. Most people, like yesterday, left their questions afterwards because they had to watch it after work or whatever they were doing. And that's fine. I'm going to respond to some of those questions. And I also want to point out, get on my email list, get on our email list because there are tools that will be sent to you there. And also you can join that Facebook group. It's a great community of support. And the links of both of those should be in the description and or the chat. So just look in that, and that should be there for you. And let me see here. Let me press a couple buttons here. So yes, we are going to talk about when your adult child is not talking to you. So yesterday, let me just give you a recap. We were talking about these times where your kids maybe they go in their room, they lock the door, or they're not even around the house, and every time you try to talk to them, they just won't talk to you, or they're shutting down the door, they're shutting down the conversation, they're shutting everything down, right? And we talked about the many different ways they do that. Sometimes they're talking to you, but they shut it down by shifting the conversation constantly away from what you need to talk about. And then we talked about approach, how important your approach is, and, looking at your tone, looking at how, just like when you're talking to them, right? And the way you start the conversation, remembering that you love them, you care about them, and that your goal is to help them learn. It's help them to grow. It's help them to help them move forward in their life. And we also talked about being very persistent, right? And patient, but continuing to have the conversation. It's not just going to be one or two conversations, right? And when you're talking, shifting back and forth between what's the plan, right? What needs to change and that kind of stuff. And also what's going on inside of you and how you can say, hey, here's the next thing that needs to be accomplished. Let's talk about it. But when they're having a hard time talking about it, that might be where you need to connect more with how they're doing. Are they anxious? Are they worried? How do they feel about the steps that need to happen? Because a lot of times, parents, their conversations have turned into just it's always about the plan. It's always about moving forward, and you need to focus a little bit more on connection. And that's a really big point, and I want to kind of just dig into that for a moment here. With when you're talking with your child and that doesn't go well, right? Or they're just at a point they don't want to talk. That's more of a connection issue. That's more of a relational issue than a problem solving issue. And that's where you need to really focus in on what's going on in your relationship with them. And so this can be a tough question that I see a lot of parents struggle with, a tough question to ask their adult child, but being able to say, hey, how do you feel about our relationship, right? How do you feel about me as a parent? How do you feel like when I'm approaching you and I'm talking to you? It's like basically like, what's the reason you're having a hard time talking? What's the reason that you keep shutting this down? That's a tough question for a lot of parents to ask, because what you hear is probably not what you want to hear, right? Because it's their version of who you are to them, right? And if they're angry, if they're anxious, if they're stressed out, if they're really struggling, it's easy for children to project all of their distress onto a parent. Right? And sometimes that's just because you're their parent, right? You're a safe person. You're the person they always grew up with. Maybe they used to confide in you, and but that doesn't mean you're completely blameless, right? And please be patient as I'm explaining this, right? First, what you hear from them, there might be some truth in it, right? Maybe the conversations have been too harsh at times, right? Or maybe there's been so much rescuing that they're starting to resent the fact that they haven't learned what they need to learn, right? And so you start hearing these things, and there's a little bit of truth to it, right? I talk to parents all the time. They say, I know I enabled too much. I know I was too harsh. I know I did this type of things. It's not about feeling blame as a parent. It's about moving through that and processing it and talking with it about your children. So what I see a lot of parents do is they're like, wait, that's not the whole story, right? You forget about how you did this or how this was going on or this was happening. And there's truth to what you're saying. But if you go defensive in that moment, right? If you get really defensive, like, okay, let's get back to the facts of what really happened, you kind of miss the point. Right? They even when they're not saying it, because a lot of times they won't, they want to know that they can have like an open conversation, that they can express how they feel, what they think, even when what they feel and think does not match up with your narrative of what happened, or even the facts of what happened. And so this is why it's hard for parents, right? Because you're going to listen to a kid who might accuse you. They might misrepresent how history occurred, and things like that. But if a parent goes defensive right away, that's usually where it'll break down. So what you need to do in those moments is you need to be willing to listen to them and know in your mind, right, that just because you understand and you've listened to them, right, that doesn't mean you agree with what they're saying. Right. So like if you were telling me right now, you're just telling me some stuff about, well, I don't like you for this reason, Jonathan, or you did this or you did that. I could listen to you. Right. And I could hear like, okay, why are they feeling the way they're feeling? Why are they saying the things they're saying? Like, where is that coming from? And I could just listen, and I could even share with you like, okay, so you're upset at me for this reason. And because this happened and you don't like this about me or what I did. Is that what you're saying? Right? That's kind of like what you do with someone where you're understanding, but you're not agreeing. Because in my mind, I might be saying, no, I don't agree with what they're saying. I don't believe that was my intent or why I did what I did or, those type of things. But I want the other person to know that I'm interested in talking to them. I'm interested in working things out. And I'm interested in even hearing if there's something I can do better. And so that's something that you can say, right? I may not agree with everything you say, but there might be some things that I can do better, right? I want to work this out with you. And that's a big step for parents to take, is that willingness to say, I do want to work this out with you, right? Um, that right there can be huge, right? Let me give you another way of thinking about it. If there's no way to talk about what's really going on, then you're not going to know what's really going on, right? And you've got to have a way to keep the conversation going forward. So your willingness to hear and to ask, like, hey, how do you feel about me? How do you feel about the relationship? How do you feel about, us working together on this? Right? That's showing a willingness to work things through. Again, that might be multiple conversations. It usually is, right? You're not going to work through everything in one conversation, but your willingness to come back and try also shows love, right? So that's a big, big part. And we were talking about boundaries a lot. And one of the things that I said was that boundaries are a part of the communication, are one of the things that you talk about. But the boundaries you talk about are about kind of like how things move forward, right, between the two of you. So you're defining your relationship, because remember, a boundary is about who's responsible for what, right? And, whose life, and so that can get into conversations. Like if they feel like you're overreaching, right? You're too much in their business or something like that, then that can become a boundary conversation, right? About, well, I don't want to be in your business too much, right? But I am supporting you and I want to know that you're doing okay or that you're moving forward. So how do we work out that conversation? And yeah, so that was a lot of what we talked about yesterday. And what I wanted to follow up with was that big piece that I just said, the importance of continuing to keep the conversation going. That's redundant, but to be able to understand what is going on, like what's going on in the relationship, and being able to work through that. And that's often the missing piece. And it's a combination of distress in the relationship, how they feel about you and that kind of stuff. And, and also the boundaries moving forward, like disagreements and how things look moving forward, right? So those are things that you have to talk through with them. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure I could see if there happened to be any comments that popped up. But once again, oh wait, I think I got it here. All right, I got my screen up now. All right, so the other piece that I wanted to follow up on is when parents tell me that their child is not talking to them. I often want them to define that, because are they not talking to you about anything, right? Or are they talking to you, but they won't talk about difficult subjects, right? Or they'll talk, but they become immediately defensive, or they're giving you that I don't know, or they just are physically avoiding you. Right? It's like, to what extent, if you're able to communicate with them at all, focusing on that relationship, focusing on that connection piece is really important, right? And I'm not talking about avoiding the hard conversations, but if you're able to talk to them, but you can't have the hard conversations, right? That's more of a relational thing. So you need to get on the same page as far as, I want you to know that I love you and I care about you and I'm here to help you. And that's why we need to talk through these more difficult things, right? So that was a point I was making yesterday as well. But there's a big difference between being completely cut off and there being these avoidance situations where, yeah, they'll talk to you, maybe they'll eat with you, they'll do something like that, but they don't talk about the difficult things. That's where it shuts down. And that's where you got to work on that foundation first. So a couple of questions that came in yesterday that I want to address. One person was asking about, what about if your child, the way they worded it was, has a mental illness, and they didn't say what it was, right? So I'm just going to put the category of mental health challenges out there, right? So that could be maybe they're on the autism spectrum, maybe they have extreme anxiety, maybe they have ADHD. The term we use a lot of times is that they will become dysregulated, right? They become emotionally activated, and that's a common thing with those criteria. And so it's a fair question, right? What about communication when there's a mental health challenge on some level? And why that's a fair question is, one, I know a lot of parents are dealing with that, and two, it does add another layer, right? And so this is where I almost would want to hear more specific things, and I'm not going to go through every single mental health condition, right? But when I was talking about they become easily dysregulated, right? They become easily emotional, agitated, aggravated. That's a common thing that happens. And a lot of that is because they are overwhelmed, right? And getting to why they are overwhelmed and being extra sensitive to that is really the general approach. So if they're getting overwhelmed because let's say that they have autism, right? And so it's very difficult for them to change and to transition, and to talking about change is very overwhelming. And so maybe you have to spend some extra time in setting that conversation up, explaining why you need to talk about it, and extra small steps. I mean, usually that's another part of it is the steps are a little bit smaller, a little bit more digestible in the change that needs to happen and in the conversations. And being able to take that time and connect with them on what about this conversation is triggering you or is difficult for you, and how are you feeling now? Whereas with what we call maybe a more neurotypical kid or someone who doesn't have a mental health challenge, disorder, such, you could kind of push through that, right? They can tolerate the frustration of a difficult conversation easier. But when there's those extra challenges, then taking time. And like with ADHD, a classic thing that I see is parents, they lose the audience, right? They lose the attention, and but they're talking at this point, and sometimes if their adult child isn't saying anything back, they're just taking it as, oh, okay, well, they're listening, right? But they're not listening, and you're talking too much, and you need to work at having more of a back and forth conversation. So like just one little point. What did you hear? How do you feel about it? What do you think? Okay. And you talk through that one little point before you get to the next point. So it'd be kind of like the opposite of what I'm doing right here, right? I'm just rattling off point after point after point. If you're tuned out, then it's not an effective conversation. So if this was a back and forth, I would say, well, here's one little piece. What do you think about that? Does that make sense to you? Right? Do you have any other ideas about that? Okay, now let's move on to the next thing. And then if I see you starting to get distressed, overwhelmed, I can see some of those tells happening. I might slow down and say, "Hey, how you doing?" Like, what you look a little agitated right now, or maybe frustrated, or is something going on with you? Let's talk about that, and then let's get back to a good place, and then okay, now let's get to another step. So that back and forth is it's important with anyone, right? You don't want the conversation to get ahead of the connection, right? If we're not connecting anymore, then the conversation isn't working. It's just when they have, they're maybe neurodivergent, or something like that that's going on, like a mental health condition, then you got to be extra patient with that process. So I'm happy to answer more questions about that, and that would probably be a good thing for us to have a specific talk on at some point, but I wanted to address that question. The other question that I'm going to address was someone was asking about they're mowing grass out there. I don't know if that's picking up on the microphone, but it's distracting to me, speaking of attention and focus. So the other question that someone was asking was about communication with an adult child that's living on their own, right? Those kind of situations, boundaries, conversations, how does that look? And that's a big old depend, right? It depends on many different things. But the first question that I'm curious about is, what's the level of support, right? Because of course you want a relationship with your adult child, right? You want to be able to communicate. You want to have that connection, and I want that for you too. But it's a different scenario if they're living independently, and I don't mean in an apartment that you're paying for. I mean, like, they're financially independent. They're managing their life, their mental health, and they're doing all that, right? Because you don't want to be in a position where the conversation is about telling them how to live their life, right? That's not the proper boundary right there, right? Because they have separated, right? They have their own life, their own structure. And so it's more about, I want to hear and talk to you about what's going on in your life, not to tell you what to do, not to judge you, but to have a connection. And sometimes that's the barrier, right? I've seen that with young adults, right? They don't want to talk to their parents because they feel judged, they feel disrespected, they feel that the parents are disappointed in them, they don't want to get lectures, they don't want to get eye rolls, they feel like the love is conditional, and they don't need the parents anymore, so they just don't talk to them anymore. And whether that's what the parent's doing or that's just the perception, although usually it's somewhere in between, that's the kind of thing that needs to be talked through. Right. So that approach is more, I want to talk about the relationship. How do you feel about how we're doing? What feels loving, what feels maybe controlling or not loving to you? And let's talk that through. And if you're really willing to listen to them, here comes that point again, right? Doesn't mean you agree with them, but you're willing to listen to them, then there's a path to work through that stuff. If you don't want to listen to what they have to say because it's all untrue and lies, and that's what parents will say, then there's not going to be much of a conversation, right? Now, I'm not saying you need to be there while they emotionally just tear you down, right, and be disrespectful. It's okay to say, I'll be respectful to you, right? I'm not going to call you names. I'm not going to yell and scream at you and do those things, and I want you to do that with me too. Right. And we can talk about anything, but it can't just be that you're just attacking me. So there can be boundaries around that, but you need to be able to talk through those tough things. Right. So then there's the other scenario, which if there's an adult child that you are still supporting, right? And I see these scenarios where quite often I've seen this, where parents have they're paying for their car, They're paying for their apartment. Maybe they're even, paying for the cell phone and bills and things like that. And they've got a young adult who's living outside of the home, but they're not communicating and they're not holding up their end of the bargain, meaning they're not figuring out how to pay the bills and how to do this stuff, or they're spending all their money on fun and not, that kind of stuff. That's a different scenario, right? Because they're living outside your home, but they're not independent, right? They're not taking care of things. And you have to be careful in those situations because you don't want it to sound like you're trying to control them, right? It's not like I'm giving you money, you will talk to me, you will do what I want. It's not like that. It's that I am supporting. We are supporting you. The whole reason we're doing this is to help you be able to launch, to be able to move forward, be able to, establish your full adult lifestyle and living arrangement, right? And so while we're doing this, while we're supporting you, we need to know that you're moving forward. That's why we need to have these conversations. And why do we need to know you're moving forward? Because we care about you. We love you. I want you to be confident, to be successful, to be able to move forward, right? And so that's why I want to talk to you, and I need to know that that's happening, because I'm not supporting you to stay stuck. I'm not supporting you to not do anything. I'm giving this support so you're moving forward. If you're not taking those steps, then we're going to move into a different arrangement, right? Those are tough conversations, but you're well within your boundaries to be able to have that conversation. And there's another point I want to make about this. Many times the conversations are the boundaries, right? Or one of the boundaries. And that is part of what I just demonstrated there, right? When you are requiring, right? When you're saying we have to talk about this, right? You're not allowing them to avoid, right? And you're saying like, this is part of the deal. We have to communicate. Most of the most stuck situations I see is where there's very poor communication between parents and children, right? And if they've moved out and they're in an apartment, then that can be really extreme, right? We don't hear from them at all unless they need something. So parents say, I don't hear anything until they need something, right? That's not a good deal, right? That's not part of the arrangement. That can't be how it is. So the boundary is, this is something we share, right? I am supporting you. This is part of the apartment, or even if they're living in your home, right? It's part of you being here, is us communicating. It's what is okay in this. It's how you respect the relationship and the arrangement that we have. And when there is consistent communication, then I'm being careful in how I say this, but it's kind of part of a consequence in a way. I mean, sometimes that's how your kids see it, right? But it's that, I'm going to have to keep talking about what happened or how things are going and all that. And maybe they don't like it, right? But that sometimes is motivation. Like, I'm getting tired of having to talk about this. Now, I don't want that to be how they feel, right? That's why you got to come back to the connection. I want to talk because I care about you, I love you, and I'm excited, right? I'm excited about the changes that are coming, the things you're doing. And that's a big point too. Talking about their success, talking about what's been accomplished, talking about what they've done well at. Right? Imagine if every conversation keeps coming back to, okay, well, let's talk about what you're doing poorly, what hasn't been accomplished yet, what you got to be doing to catch up, right? That's just a negative connotation. That's a negative thing to be focused on. And who wants to have that conversation over and over with anybody, right? So it's more about, I believe in you. I know you can do this. Let's talk about what needs to happen next that's going to make life better. And then when it happens, celebrate it, right? Talk about it, acknowledge it. Those are all very important. So I wanted to address those questions. And if anyone has more questions or even in a different area, I do read those. I do read them, and then I bring them back into what we're talking about. So if you're catching on or tuning on towards the end of this talk, the last 2 days, we've been talking about when your adult child is not talking to you, right? And everything from your own approach, examining how your technique, your approach, and being able to come at it a different way, to also about like how to set those boundaries. And because that's just I guess you can call it foundational, fundamental part of getting out of a stuck situation, right? Helping your struggling young adult is communication. That's the mechanism to do everything else. So knowing how to communicate better, more effectively, how to push through those difficult moments, how to keep the communication going, all of that is very, very important. And that's why we talk about it so much. And as always, the way I talk about it is you got to focus on the connection, the relationship, right? And if there's tension, if there's bad blood, if you will, right? If things aren't right in between the two of you, you're not going to get very far. So many times it's really talking about what is our relationship and what is this really about? And when you can shift the connection to we love each other, we care about each other, we want the best for you, and that's why we need to talk. When your child believes that about you, right? It doesn't mean the conversations are easy. They're still difficult conversation, difficult things, right? They're struggling. But you can keep that connection open, keep the conversation, and then push into the more difficult parts of the conversation. And like always, right? Why are you talking? That's your foundation. That's your fallback. Because you love them, you care about them, you want them to move forward. Why are you setting a boundary? Why are you no longer paying for something? Why are you not jumping in and fixing this? Right? Why are you holding a hard line? Right? Because you care about them. Because you want them to move forward. Right? You want the whole situation to move forward, and for them to feel better about who they are and where they're going. Right? And so that's why you need to learn how to solve this. That's why you need to work through the frustration of yes, I get it. You're in a job and you don't like this job, and you got a boss who's being unfair, right? That's a horrible situation, right? But you got to figure out what to do, how to push forward. You can't just quit, right? You can't just quit another job. You've got to figure out how to push forward and do it the right way. Then we'll find a better job later. We'll find we can problem solve this. But those moments are, they're difficult, but you want it to come back to, because you need this. You need to know how to do this, right? And something that really helps, that I find, it's looking to the future, having like kind of a glimpse of the future. What is this going to feel like in the future, right? So let's take that job thing. Let's say you stick it out. You find a way to deal with this ridiculous boss and this job that you don't like, right? Let's say you're able to stick that out for a few more months until you're able to pay down this thing or get this other job. What's that going to feel like? What's that going to look like? Because I think what it's going to show is that you showed resilience, that you showed grit, that you figured out a way to push through and to handle a difficult situation. Right? You were able to figure out how to pay off those bills and get another job the right way and not have this gap of unemployment. That's going to feel really good. That's going to be character, right? So that's why you got to get your butt up and get out there. That's why you got to keep trying at this, right? So it's really about how you keep the conversation on them moving forward and how important that is for their life and whatever it is they're dealing with, right? If that's starting on a level that they need to go into treatment or get more help to overcome an addiction, right? That's the next step, right? But what's it going to feel like, right? When you've completed the treatment, when you're not needing that addiction anymore, right? When you've moved past that, what's that going to feel like, right? That's going to show a lot of character, a lot of strength. And like wherever they are, that's the focus and that's the conversation. And that's very different than how I see a lot of families communicating when they're really stuck, right? It's like, okay, we're not happy about this. And everyone's talking about like what they don't like and how unfair this is and how angry they are and how this is what needs to happen. We just need this to happen. And it's those kind of conversations that they've pulled so far away from the relationship, the connection, why we're doing this. And it's not effective. So again, one of the reasons I really focus on this point is because if you can't keep the conversation going and it's not the right type of communication, then you can't really go anywhere else, can't do anything more. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. I've got a few minutes if there's any questions, but then we actually have a meeting here in the office that I have to get to. And if there is anything, I will just remind you that we do this 10:30 every weekday. And those of you who are watching it afterwards, and I know many people can't do this at 10:30 in the morning, Eastern time, by the way, is leaving a question either in Facebook in the Facebook group or YouTube in the chats or the videos. I read all of those, maybe not every day, but I get to them. And that's where what drives a lot of these little chats, because this is just a time to chat about the questions that are coming up and address some of those things. Final thoughts are, remember the email list. There are some tools that I would love to send you. If you get on the email list, I can send those to you. And then also the Facebook group is a great community to connect, to find out that to know that you are not alone and that there are others who are working through, and our communications and talk in there is also a good support. So I am going to wrap up. Thank you so much for everyone who has been watching, and I'll be looking for those comments. You guys take care.